Now that we've got a clear idea of what UCLA's roster is going to look like for Mick Cronin, how do we think this team is actually going to gel on the court in terms of what the product's going to look like? Will they be good offensively, defensively? All that and more coming up next on Locked On UCLA.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer, diehard Bruins fan. And thanks for making this your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. So like, comment, and subscribe. Become an everydayer as soon as we get into August, Monday through Friday, baby, with fall camp just around the corner. Where we're going to start today for the Locked On UCLA pod is, Mick Cronin. I talked about in yesterday's episode how he basically all but confirmed the official commitments, if you will, of Adai Mara and Berke Boyan-Tunchel, the two European products, the overseas players who are going to come to UCLA, round out the roster, and pretty much give all of us an idea of what UCLA is going to put on the court next year for 23 to 24. But then I got here sitting and wondering, I know I've debated minutes, who could potentially have a big season, who could be a breakout star, but how is this team actually going to fit on the court, right? Who is going to stand out? How are they going to play? This is a roster where if you add all the different players based on their hometowns listed on the official roster page, and then if you add the two newcomers coming in when the official announcements are supposed to come next week, as Mick Cronin announced on the Petros and Money show on Friday, July 28th, the Bruins have 7 international players. If you add in Adem Bona and Kenneth Nuba, both from Nigeria, although Bona did come the prep route, and so did Nuba. You've got Stefanovic, who came via Serbia through the transfer portal from Utah, but technically from Serbia. And then you've got the 4 freshmen coming in already with the other 3 coming in. You've got a young roster, a lot of guys coming from overseas. This has to be arguably the most unique roster across the country in terms of its construction. Well, the talent, I believe, is there. I've talked about their abilities individually in various different episodes. But here we are with a team that I just wonder how long it's going to take for them to actually play well. We've seen the non-conference schedule. The Bruins won't be tested in those first few games. It'll probably take until they head to Maui when they play Marquette and they get a true sense of what they're actually going against the top tier competition across the country when they play those teams where they could play Kansas in the second round of Maui. But you've got Mara, who's coming late. You've got Boyan-Tunchel, who's been recruited heavily for the Bruins by the Bruins for a long time. And all these guys coming in. And without the likes of Ivo Simovic being the coach, being a key part of recruiting these guys, whether it be Stefanovic through the portal, whether it be the other 4 players coming in, right? The Feebles, the Vides, everything in between. And I know Mick Cronin stepped up and talked about his involvement of international recruiting and how we expect him to be a bigger part of that. How is this team going to come together? The highest rated recruit, or one of the higher rated recruits, Devin Williams, is the 6'10 freshman from Riverside. All the talk is how it's so tough to rate these international guys based on the domestic stars-based recruiting model used by all the various sites. We're not going to really name one specifically because there's quite a few, and they all generally do the same thing other than have different opinions about certain guys based on their characteristics. I think this will be an interesting team because 7 international guys. You've got quite a bit of youth with the likes of the 3 incoming freshmen from the domestic side, Brandon Williams, Mack, and Devin Williams. And then you've got the 4 international freshmen. So that number 7 comes around quite a bit. 7 international, 7 freshmen. And I just wonder how many games might they lose just because they're not all on the same page. Being a young team that's never really played together, playing for a coach who has a certain expectation, a standard defensively, where he also gives his players a lot of free reign offensively sometimes, right? Where it's all right, give it to Jaquez, let Tiger Campbell do his thing. Mari Bailey can sometimes take it to the rack. Singleton will certainly shoot those 3 balls, just like it was last year for a pretty successful campaign, although they were an older bunch. The youngsters, they will make some mistakes. We'll be excited. Under no circumstances is this team going to go undefeated, or will they have some ugly losses on their resume? They probably will. I just sit here and I'm very excited for early November to come around. Not that the football season won't be exciting, depending on who's the starting quarterback in the final year in the Pac-12 for the football program, but this team is going to be so much more intriguing, especially from the beginning of the year, than last year's teams was. Last year's team overall, not that this team might have a more successful campaign. They might or might not compete for a 1 seed. There's a lot of big talent. I've talked about a Daimara being a potential lottery pick. Even Vide showcased some things playing for Slovenia. And then you've got Stefanovic coming from Utah, who's already done good things at the D1 level. And the list goes on and on. You just wonder how early in the year is Mick Cronin going to rely on veteran guys and older players and guys who just earn their minutes a little bit more versus which of the youngsters is going to blossom later in the season? Is it Devin Williams, the 6'10 rim protector who can step in later in the season, the Riverside native? Is it Brandon Williams, 6'7 from Queens, who maybe makes a late run at a spot, right? Does Sebastian Mack out of nowhere come in and find ways to get some minutes competing for a backup role as the point guard, maybe some minutes at the 2? I've kind of talked about who can get what minutes, even with all these players coming in. But now that we know they're all coming in, it's a fascinating thought. Hey, these guys will make it an interesting draw to watch to begin this season for UCLA hoops. And if I'm you sitting there at home, I'm sitting here wondering, man, this will certainly be entertaining. And this is quite a big roster. You've got the 7'3 Mara, the 6'8", 6'9 Buyak Tunchel, a couple of 6'10 guys, 3 6'10 players, almost 6'7", 6'6 across the board. This team is going to be able to hopefully hit the boards hard, hit the glass, win the rebounding battle, play some terrific defense, maybe have even better defensive metric numbers than last year when they had one of the better players in the country in Jaquez Jr., the best defensive player in the country in Clark, and the best Pac-12 or the best Pac-12 freshman in their conference and one of the better big men across the country defensively in Adem Bona. And I'm thinking this team could somehow maybe be at that level just based on their sheer size and athleticism. Ilan Fible was already compared to Jalen Clark by Mick Cronin in that Petros and Money show. Now, is that freshman year Clark or is that junior year Clark? Now, those are a couple of different things you can think about and talk about based on the development through the season. But this team will go through their growing pains. It'll be entertaining early, frustrating at points, and hopefully this design, this grand scheme of things can turn into a beautiful picture come March, and the Bruins get hot just like UConn did this year and eventually win a national championship and break this long slump because, hey, these guys are ready to work. And I think Mick Cronin has made his point clear. We're not going after these 5-star prima donnas locally. We're not that there's anybody specific, but we're going to go and find the hardest working guys. While some might say Cronin whiffed in his recruiting, this could have maybe been the best blessing or maybe the plan all along, turning into what could be a dream roster in the final year of the Pac-12. Coming up next, we're going to talk about Laiatu Latu, his individual expectations, what UCLA thinks heading into their final year of Pac-12 play with Chip Kelly and company. Can Latu be one of the best players in the country defensively? All that and more coming up next on Locked On UCLA. So right as we're thinking here, hey, you know, if you want some of the best fits, the best parts, UCLA basketball, they're trying to do that with a bunch of different parts. But for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. Mick Cronin, I think he's done that for sure with this roster, but it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. The next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can make sure that every part fits just right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage, and you'll get to look for the green check to know how the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game, and over hundreds of millions of parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. And it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Cruising into the second segment of the Locked On UCLA podcast, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer with you guys. And overall for the Bruins, the football team thinking some sky-high expectations for a team that was picked to finish sixth. You've got an offense that's somewhat looking to replace a lot of production from last year, the Bobos, the Charbonnets, and of course the DTRs. Defensively, you do have some key guys coming back, led by Laiatu Latu, who went with Chip Kelly and company to the Pac-12 Media Day in Las Vegas. And what Latu is trying to set for himself, one of those premier comeback players of the year, right? Those big-time stories where he was forced to medically retire at Washington, sit out a couple of seasons, got cleared right before the 22 campaign, and all of a sudden he's arguably the Bruins' best defender, leading them in sacks, and was a key portion and was arguably one of the top two edge rushers in the Pac-12. If he was able to lead the conference in rushing, he would have been one of the best players and is still one of the best players coming back for the redshirt senior from Sacramento. Last year, appeared in every game, 12.5 tackles for loss, 10.5 sacks. That's top 10 in the country, second in the Pac-12, and about nearly just over 0.81 sacks per game. Had 3 sacks in one game against Colorado, 3.5 tackles for loss, and was the Pac-12 Player of the Week for that game. Had 6 tackles in a couple of games, 3 forced fumbles, recovered a fumble, the College Football Comeback Player of the Year award winner, and was a part of the Associated Press and the Athletic Midseason All-America teams for his efforts defensively. So this is what he had to say at the media days last week, talking about, hey, this is the number I want to be for my sack numbers. I want 15 sacks. I want to get to every single quarterback multiple times. Loves to do a Euro step to break through the O-line and get a free run at the quarterback. And remember, he had to sit out 2 seasons because of a neck injury over at Washington, transferred to UCLA, got that medical clearance, and he's one of the comeback players of the year with Michael Penix Jr. from Washington and Minnesota's Mohamed Ibrahim. And what he was quoted as saying was, Latu, it's a crazy feeling. I never lost my passion and love for the game. It will always be there. But it's just different being acknowledged for what you did on the field than being a nobody that I was. So talking about how he wants to get 15 sacks. He wants to be first-team All-American, lead the nation in sacks, and have a launching point to go into the future, potentially, of his football career, where it didn't seem like he had one coming into 2022. And out of nowhere, he broke out and was UCLA's most important defensive player when he was on the field, arguably all of last year when he could get to the quarterback. Now, do I think he can get to 15 sacks? It's a little different when people have tape on you. Not that Latu ain't good, but he's going to get a lot more attention, which leaves openings around for the rest of the defense, where they decide to blitz more, whether they decide to do different things, whether Latu simply adds to his repertoire of breaking through. He has the Euro step, maybe adds a spin move, does a little undercut there. Whatever works, has Latu grown his game to the point where he can get to that 15 sack number. To do it multiple years in a row in college makes you a very highly competitive NFL player. Not that he can't be that already, but it seemed like he had to go through one more year, the redshirt senior, and I hope his last year, what could be, a dream season for him. If he's a stalwart defensively, if the Bruins can get that pressure, not allow the quarterbacks to have a full year to throw in the pocket, then I think the Bruins can be a very competitive team defensively, and hopefully that bend but don't break philosophy is no longer, and they can get to the quarterback and end up being a team that forces you to go more 3 and out than it is go get 20, 25 yards and maybe get a third down stop, hopefully based off a tipped interception. Latu was a guy who was comeback player of the year. Now he wants to do it, and with all the preseason expectation, wants to do it again for a second year. I believe in him. The Bruins need him to be good, but all the attention that he's going to receive is going to open up opportunities for others, and you just wonder who's going to benefit from that based on the attention Latu's going to bring for himself from his 2022 success. Coming up, we're going to wrap up Locked On UCLA and talk about more of Jaime Jaquez Jr. Well, why am I talking Jaime Jaquez Jr.? Well, we had some funny quotes on a pod about what helped him become a better prospect, a better NBA player. I know he had to deal with the shoulder injury going into the summer league. What made him a better player? I'm going to throw some words he threw out there, and a player he mentioned specifically by name. Maybe that might draw the ire of Bruins fans, but we'll talk about all that and more coming up next on Locked On UCLA. Wrapping up the Locked On UCLA podcast, Anderson-Yoxsimer with you guys. Jaime Jaquez Jr., he was on a different pod, and he was a part of the Podcast P with Paul George. And why am I talking Podcast P with Paul George? Well, Jaquez was, he can be a loquacious fella. He's somewhat of those quiet, maybe not the most outspoken leaders, at least not in my mind, but he just was a good Bruin that helped the UCLA program become a reputable program. Remember where it was left by Alford in 1920, heading into COVID, and all of a sudden, Final Four, Jaquez, who was able to grow his numbers, become the number 18th overall pick with the Heat, might be dangled currently in a potential trade with the Heat, with the Portland Trail Blazers about Dame Lillard, although we'll see how that happens because they've got to wait. What Jaquez said on this podcast with Paul George is what helped him develop. If you remember, he'd go do off-season runs and play with NBA players or former NBA players in pickup games, and the value of playing with those and that experiences helped him develop a lot as a player. And he said, a lot of guys, there's so many great players that go through them runs. I think Mick Cronin, the way he does it is just tremendous. And the way he allowed me to be there at such a young age. I remember going to my senior year of high school. He let me come and watch and even sometimes play, talking about Cronin and Jaquez, watching these NBA players go through these off-season exhibition workouts. You sit there at home and you're like, I want to go play in some of these games, in some of these exhibition games, just against random people in the Y. Now here you are. Imagine, the Drew League behind closed doors and all that with some high level or maybe former NBA level talent going at it and playing. And what Jaquez was talking about was Corey Brewer. And, when, especially in recent UCLA basketball history, the name Corey Brewer just kind of gives you the chills, kind of makes you cringe in the worst way. But this is what he had to say about Corey Brewer, in which I remember being there and seeing Corey Brewer. He was one of those first guys to go there. He's not the biggest NBA guy in the world, but I just remember I knew who he was. All Bruins fans do. And I was watching him play, and I was like, dang, I'm changing some words here. Dang, these guys are really good. I'm changing some words because he cussed, and we'll just not do that right now. Like, even a guy that isn't the top of the top all-star, just really busting everyone's butt. And it just really gave me perspective, like, dang, I got to get better, the former UCLA star said in his quote, and how he produced and grew every game. Averaged almost 18 points per game last year, 8 rebounds, couple of assists, nearly a couple steals on the All-America second team, and was the first UCLA Pac-12 Player of the Year award winner since Kevin Love won it when it was the Pac-10 back in 2008. So it took UCLA nearly 15 years before they had a Conference Player of the Year, and it was Jaquez, who was in the top 10 all-time scoring, is a guy that maybe might not even get his number retired. Remember, you've got all sorts of legendary Bruins who don't have that honor of getting that number retired. But he's a guy that certainly will be a well-remembered, well-loved Bruin for his time, his 4-year career, the Camarillo native. And just interesting how he brings up that point, right? That off-season workout, that growth from year 1 to year 2. It makes you think, what about this year's team can have that breakout season? Is it McClendon, a couple years removed from the devastating knee injuries? Is he healthier? Is that shot good? Is he going to get some minutes this year for Will McClendon? Is it the likes of Dylan Andrews? I know you guys in the comments have thrown out, and we've seen the tenacity, the athleticism, the spunk coming in some backup minutes as the backup of Tiger Campbell in 22 to 23 as the point guard. This year, maybe expected to be the starting role to start the year, to begin the year, is Andrew is that guy who makes that offseason development. I know Bona's had to recover. Has he been able to get some development, or will his development come in season, growing from a more polished player, from just a defensive stalwart and a dunker and an athletic superhuman on the court, to a full, complete basketball post player? Is that what Bona is able to do, or will he transition that in the season? Stefanovic, will he become more of a shot taker, shot maker, a better shot maker, a better shot taker coming over from Utah, despite his ability to hit the three, make some shots? He has some tendency to shoot some bad shots. Is he a guy that's going to grow? How are all these international players going to grow coming over from overseas, whatever part of the world they're from, coming to Westwood? How are they going to grow? And that's what the legacy Jaquez has set moving over, seeing these NBA players, seeing these elite guys, and maybe not even the most elite of the elite, right? Not even the top cream of the crop players, just certain guys. Some might be a thorn in the side of all UCLA fans. So maybe Jaquez, you shouldn't throw around the names of some former Florida Gators during a specific time that just crushes me from my young UCLA fandom days. Those Florida teams, we know why they won. A lot of NBA players on that team, some good, high-quality NBA players. But you sit here and you're like, let's not throw those names. The more important thing is seeing how he grew, even getting on the Podcast P episode with Paul George, and just who's going to be that UCLA player, if you parallel it to now, that's going to grow. Who is that guy that can make that difference, that jump from kind of something to first, second team All Pac-12? Dare I say All-American? Is it Bona going from would have been NBA draftee if not hurt to All-American? Not Pac-12 Freshman of the Year, but Pac-12 Player of the Year, maybe Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. That's the growth these Bruins who are returning need to try and emulate from the game of Jaime Jaquez Jr. The value of developing talent from year to year, and Jaquez used that by playing exhibition offseason pickup games with the likes of former NBA players or current NBA players, or just seeing how those guys went back at it from watching it as a high school senior to developing throughout his years in the collegiate game. That was funny. Jaquez in those quotes, I was reading it on an On3 website from the Podcast P episode, how he's got some colorful language in there. Jaquez got some personality, maybe letting it fly out. So it's fun to see him be a little bit more himself, or just maybe he's playing up to the crowd, the audience. Who knows? But in the meantime, we're going to wrap things up here for Locked On UCLA, because I know July's almost coming to a close. Fall camp, quarterback battles, everything in between is officially going to start again pretty soon. We're going to go more daily, Monday through Friday, than we have the entire summer coming up pretty soon. So become an everyday listener of the Locked On UCLA podcast. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Thanks for your support. Hit the download button on any audio platform, from Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, any audio platform you listen to the podcast. Thank you for your support. I'm Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer, getting ready to sign off. Everything UCLA basketball and football coming up in the next few episodes. Hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA fights. This has been Locked On UCLA. Go Bruins. We're excited. We're going to have more awesome coverage coming up next on the Locked On UCLA podcast. Stay tuned for some more good stuff.